my light on so I can see. Okay. As chair of Division 2 of the House Finance Committee, I find that due to the state of emergency declared by the governor as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and in accordance with House Rule 67 and the governor's emergency order number 12, pursuant to Executive Order 2020-04, this public body is authorized to meet electronically. This public meeting is pertaining to education. Please note that there is no physical location for members of the public to observe and listen contemporaneously to this meeting. However, in accordance with Emergency Order 1, I am confirming that all members of the committee and select legislative staff have the ability to communicate contemporaneously during this meeting through the Zoom electronic meeting platform, and the public has access to contemporaneously listen and, if necessary, participate in this meeting by the Zoom platform or by telephone. All necessary access information has been made available in the House calendar and through the electronic calendar on the General Court website. The notice of this meeting complies with House rules and RSA 91A. Anyone who has a problem accessing the meeting should email lba_fiscal@leg.state.nh.us. In the event the public is unable to access the meeting will be adjourned and rescheduled. The LBA staff are on the meeting assisting us. Please note that all votes that are taken during this meeting shall be done by roll call vote. Let's start the meeting by taking a roll call attendance. When each member states their presence, please also state whether there is anyone else in the room with you during this meeting, which is required under the right to know law. So Representative Lynn, would you please call the roll?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Bucco.
Yes, thank you. I'm present. I'm at home in Conway and no one else is in the room.
Thank you. Representative Danielson. Danielson is not here. Representative Heath.
Mary Heath here in Manchester, and I'm home alone.
All right. And I'm Bob Lynn. I'm home at my home in Wyndham. No one else is in the room, but my wife is present in the house. Representative Murray, as I understand, is going to be joining us shortly, but is not here right this minute. Representative Petrie.
Yes, I'm here in the house in Farmington, and it's not the Cayman Islands. And the dog and the wife is running around the halls as usual.
Thank you. And Representative Umberger.
Yes, I'm in my home in Kearsarge, and my husband is here at the moment, but he's going to go out shopping. So we'll see what he brings back.
All right. Thank you. That completes the attendance. And I'll make a note when Representative Murray arrives.
Okay, Mick, is Caitlin ready to come on board?
Yeah, we've got a few members from the Department of Education on hand, and I'm going to bring them all in so they can speak.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. And thank you for joining us, Caitlin. I know that this will be an extremely interesting day. So I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say. So
we always think it's very interesting, and we're glad that you take the opportunity to listen to us talk about these massive programs that we manage over here at the Department of Education. So okay. Good morning. For the record, I'm Caitlin Davis. I'm a division director at the Department of Education. We are here today to present to you the Department of Education's budget requests for House Bill 2, and to go through the variety of different accounts that they're in and to kind of discuss and explain the purpose of the programs. So on the call with me today, we have the various different staff that oversee the programs in the Education Trust Fund. Those staff, you can see them all here. As of right now, we will probably have them turn off their cameras, or Mickey, I'll probably have you add them as they're speaking, but just for introduction purposes. So the first topic you will hear about today is state special education aid, which those of you who have been doing this for a long time know this as catastrophic aid. Rebecca Fredette, she's there on the phone, and she has two of her staff, Lisa and Bridget, sitting behind her. She will be first up to talk about that program. Next up on the call, we will have Eric Falworth. You have Eric down here on the call as well. He is the administrator of Career and Tech Education, and he will be talking about tuition and transportation for CTE centers. Next up, we have Amy Clark. Amy Clark is the administrator of the Bureau of School Facilities and Safety, and she will be talking about a variety of different school aids today, including building aid, the Public School Infrastructure Fund, and lease aid to charter public schools. And last up, you have Mark Meganello. You guys are all very familiar with Mark. He very fortunately now works for the Department of Education, and he will be talking about charter school aid and adequacy aid. So before we get up to Becky, I'm just going to share my screen and give you a quick synopsis of our presentation today. So these are the funds that we're going to be talking about. So this is the information from the budget. You have the appropriations from the last 2 years, as well as the appropriation that is in the governor's budget. These funds are now in the Education Trust Fund, with the exception of one small one, the Public School Lease Aid Fund. But historically, some of these funds have been in the general fund, and then some of them have been in the Education Trust Fund. As of fiscal year 20 and 21, a building aid, tuition and transportation, and special education aid were all moved into the Education Trust Fund. So the lines that you would follow in the budget may not be the exact lines that we've seen in the past. The accounting units have changed, but for historical purposes, we have included them here so you can kind of follow the history. So each one of these funds we're going to talk about today. Just a reminder that these funds are now paid out of the Education Trust Fund. The Education Trust Fund is established in law under RSA 198.39, and that has a variety of dedicated revenue sources that goes to the Education Trust Fund for the purpose of distributing these grants each year. These grants go to public schools and public charter schools. They equate to about $1 billion of state aid dispersed across the state every single year. And I just want to remind the committee that these funds that you're seeing here in front of you are 100% flow through. That means they go directly to the schools, and none of it is maintained by the Department of Education for the purpose of staff and whatnot. Those are funded in various other areas of our budget that will be covered by Tammy Valencourt at a different time. So with that introduction, I'm going to hand the mic over to Rebecca Fredette, who will be talking about state special education aid.
Good morning. Thank you, Caitlin. As Caitlin said, I'm Rebecca Fredette. I'm the State Director of Special Education, and I'm going to review for you special education aid. Just going to share my screen with you. Special education, oh, hold on. Special education aid, formerly known as catastrophic aid, is funds that offer us financial assistance to defray the cost for special education, distributed under RSA 186C18(3) to a responsible school district. The school district may be eligible for reimbursement only for those direct costs which are included in the IEP of a child with a disability and which qualify as special education and related services. Districts submit invoices for payments made for the cost of special education services, and the state reimburses for the allowable costs based on the previous year. So RSA 186C18 requires the state to be liable for 80% of the cost above the 3.5 times the estimated state average expenditure per pupil, and the school year preceding the year of the distribution, up to 10 times the estimated state average expenditure per pupil for the school year preceding the year of distribution. We are liable for all costs in excess of 10 times the estimated state average expenditure per pupil for the school year preceding the year of distribution. If in any year the amount appropriated for distribution as special education aid exceeds the allotted allocated amount, the district's reimbursement shall be prorated. And so there are times that we have had to prorate. So the school district is liable for the 3.5 times the cost per pupil plus 20% of the additional costs. The state is responsible for 80%, and if there are not enough funds to cover the 80%, the cost will be prorated. So we have an example. So if the estimated state average expenditure per pupil is around 16,000, and then 3.5 times that would be the 59,217. The total allowable special education cost is the 99,845. That's what they have spent on the student. The cap is going to cover the 59,000, which the district pays. And then that cost of 40,627 is above the cap. We then take that and we would cover 80%, which is 32,501. Sorry, my numbers are. And then if you were able to give them the 100%, we would give them the 32,501, and the district would still be responsible for 67,343. That's when we're able to pay the 100% from the state aid. I will say that this year was the first time since 2008 we have been able to pay that 100%. Typically, we have to prorate it. So we do have another example that shows what the cost could be going forward. So if we take the same numbers, but we have to prorate that cost here at 70%, the district's, our share goes down to 22,751, and the district responsibility goes up to $77,093.
Excuse me.
Sure.
Yeah, yeah. When you said this year, were you talking about 2021 when we had the 80%?
So it would have been for, let me get my dates right. I'm just going to make sure I get the right dates. I want to make sure. It would have been for the 1920 school year. We were able to provide the 80% and the 100%. And we didn't have to prorate the 100%. We never prorate the 80%, but we do at times have to prorate that 100% if we don't have enough funds. So this year, which we get all of our documentation in July and we review all of those. That's why it kind of gets in my head as this year, but it is for the previous year. Yeah, and then it's paid out by December. So we just finished that in December, and we were able to pay it out at the 100% that we that is required.
Representative Lynn, you had a question?
Yes, thank you. Just a quick question. When you say if there are not enough funds, it has to be prorated. Could you just explain what the formula is for the proration? How does that work?
Sorry, I have somebody in my ear telling me what I need to do.
So that's the one you just went. So go to the next one that's just like that, right there. That explains the proration.
So what would happen is so if we take the same student that I had talked about with the 100%, we would still pay the 80%, which is here, which is the 35. But then once that gets over the cap, we can't pay. Am I saying this right? No, I'm not saying this right. Sorry. So let me just clarify that this is my first time doing this. So I'm still learning all of this as we go. That's why there are two people sitting behind me.
No, you're doing fine. Don't worry. You're doing fine.
So we take in all of the special education and we look at everything that is we process it, we look through, make sure that everything is accurate, everything is appropriate, that they've spent their money on funds that they're supposed to, and then we look at how much that will be. So we say, say that everything that's turned into us comes up to $10 million. I know that's not the number. It's just a bigger number than that. And I'm going to work with a smaller one. Say that it's $10 million, but we've only been allocated through this fund $8 million. So then we would prorate everybody to only spend the $8 million because I'm not able to do the $10 million. So so once we've gone through everything, we've looked at everything that's submitted to us, we make a determination as to whether we can pay it at 100% or if we would need to prorate it so that it's at a lower rate than that 100%.
Okay. And can I just ask a follow-up, Madam Chair?
Certainly.
Just so that I'm understanding, when you say, like, you use the $10 million as, just as an example, I understand.
Yep.
So am I understanding that the way the proration works then is let's say that $10 million, just as an example, represented 100 students who were getting special education aid. So it would be on that basis. You'd say, okay, we only have 10, we only have 10, the total expenditure has been $10 million for special education. That's over the limit where we start to pay, but we only have $8 million to pay. We're going to divide that $8 million by 100 and figure out how much each of those 100 students that are getting special education would get. Is that kind of the way it works?
Representative Lynn, I believe the next slide that Becky's going to present is actually going to help explain exactly what that question is. So it might make it a little bit more clear.
I'm sorry, I'm probably way ahead of myself. I apologize.
No, it's great. It means you're understanding it. So
Representative Heath, you have a question?
I'll hold my question until they finish the next slide.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I didn't realize I was going on to this side. Thank you, Caitlin. So this slide is going to show you what we've done for each year, and it gives you each fiscal year, it gives you the count for students that we have had apply for special education aid, because not everybody will apply for special education aid unless they meet the cap. It gives you what the districts have expended. It tells you what the full entitlement would have been owed by the state, and then it tells you what we paid. So if you look at 2003, it said that our entitlement was 22,276, but we were only able to pay 17,561. No, that's not right, because it says we paid 100%. You need to come over here. You need to come over here. I'm gonna have Lisa talk really quick.
So I'll take over for just a second, and Lisa can correct me. So in 2003, there was the formula worked a little bit different. But let's look at 2018, for example. So in 2018, which is on line 22, there were 822 kids that were determined eligible for catastrophic aid by the Department of Education, meaning school districts submitted all of the expenses with the associated kids. We reviewed the expenses and determined that those kids had expenses over 3.5 times the average cost per pupil, and we could then begin to reimburse the school district. So the school district expended $80 million of allowable expenses associated with those 822 kids. I just want to point out, it is $80 million of allowable special education expenses. So there may have been other expenses associated with those kids, but they were not special education specific kids. So of that 80 million, and they may have had other expenses, but they may have not been determined by allowable by the department. There are some expenses that are not allowable for reimbursement under catastrophic / state special education aid. So the state determined that out of the $80 million, their proportional share, so the amount above the 3.5 times, and then the amount at 80% should have been $30,800,000. That's what the department should have paid if we had the full appropriated amount. However, that specific year, the department was appropriated in our state budget $22 million, meaning that we could only pay $22 million. $22 million divided by $30 million is 72%, meaning every single school district received a proration of 72% of the full catastrophic aid bill that they would have received. So had we had the full appropriation that specific year, we would have paid $30 million, but we only paid $22 million to the school districts. In fiscal year 21 is the first year in very recent memory, since it looks like 2008 in the spreadsheet here, that we had enough appropriation to fully fund all of our kids in the state, meaning that school districts submitted 742 eligible kids with $79 million of expenses occurred at the local level. $29 million of that was owed to them for the state formula, and we had $30 million of appropriation. So we do have excess appropriation that we will end up lapsing or paying for or giving to 402 court-ordered placements, depending on the available appropriation in that line. So the last 2 years, so those of you that were working on the budget in the last 2 years, We were prorated at 94% and then 100% in the last budget.
Excuse me, is it Lisa?
Yes,
Okay. So just for clarity, the school districts has to pay the 3.5%. The 3.5 times.
yes,
And-
correct. So they pay all of their invoices to reach cap and above. So for the whole year from July 1st to June 30th, they pay all their expenses. And then come July 1st, we review those. They submit those to us by July, August, and then we review them and pay out in December.
Okay, Representative Lynn, did that explain what you needed to know? You're on mute.
Sorry, I think it did. So as I understand it, then the allocation, if you can't fund 100%, it's based on the school districts as opposed to the individual children. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay,
That's
thank you.
Representative Heath?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We tried real hard to fully fund last year. I'm looking at your numbers. I see a trend that though across the state, our student numbers are decreasing, in some places significantly, I see a continued increase in the numbers of students eligible for catastrophic aid. And that's just my first question, do we know why? Secondly, one of the things that I've always been concerned about catastrophic aid, or special ed aid, we call it now, is that the manner in which it's paid out. Now it's paid out and school districts get a check in December of the following year. And it comes into municipalities or school districts as, usually they consider it revenue. So when you're doing your budget process for the year to come, if you have students that you had not anticipated, it can throw off your whole budget. And it's really a hardship for school districts. And sometimes they find themselves, especially our little school districts, in a difficult situation. Has there ever been consideration given to collecting the information? Because I know it's uploaded in your special ed system. Is there ever been consideration given to payments so that school districts would be made more whole during the course of the school year and not have to anticipate what the catastrophic aid payment coming to them might be? Can you respond?
I'll let Becky respond a little bit, but the first is that's challenging for the department because of the way that the grant works. If the legislation said to make the payment no matter what the appropriation was, then we would be able to do that. But because it has historically been up until this year prorated, the Department of Education needs to know the total amount of expenses before we can reimburse the school district. So we make sure that we have an even proration across the board. And schools incur different expenses at a different time. So they may have a kid that starts out for the year, for example, then they wouldn't submit the kid in this catastrophic aid pool because they think that their expenses are not going to be the 3.5 times, because remember 3.5 times is about $60,000 per kid, and then it gets to the point that, oh, this kid needed a few additional services, or maybe we actually do feel that the best thing for this child is an out of district placement, and this kid is now all of a sudden has a higher cost than has originally anticipated. So those costs are not necessarily evenly spread out through the year. So unless the legislation specifically said to pay the catastrophic aid bill no matter what it was without the proration, it wouldn't make sense to do that for the department. So it would need to change how the actual pool works.
Thank you, Caitlin.
Yeah,
And now my
I would
question
all,
is an increase in
So,
student numbers.
Mary, you were breaking up just a little bit because I was interrupting you. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, just my second question about the, it seems like there's a trend that the numbers are going up, and these are significantly disabled children. Do we have any indication? Is it the autism numbers that are increasing so quickly, or any ideas why?
So the numbers of students that are being submitted for special education aid have decreased, but I believe it's the costs of the, if you look at the numbers for 2021, we're at 742. So those numbers kind of stayed, it looks like they stayed somewhat in
Oh,
the same range
I was
for a
looking at
while.
backwards. I'm sorry.
That's
I get
okay.
I think the other problem with that of trying to pay more often is, when does a student meet the 3.5 times?
Yeah.
And so you know, they may meet it in the first 6 months, or they may not meet it until the last 2 months. So it would be, I think it would be very difficult to try to do something. But I think that the most school districts, or maybe I don't know everything, but a lot of the school districts do have a reserve fund that they put aside just for special education needs, for, you know, to support it until such time as they get the money from the state for special education aid.
Yes, there are many districts that will develop their own special education trust funds for situations, just as you mentioned, Representative Umberger.
Okay, I don't see any further questions, so if you wouldn't mind, we'll ask you to go ahead.
All right. So I don't think, I'm the last part of this section shows you by town how much was put out for special education aid, and the totals for those, each district that put in for special education aid. I'm not going to go through each one for you, but and there's 2 pages of those. And did you have any other questions?
I have something to
Oh,
add.
Lisa would like to add something. Lisa Moody was our fiscal person and has moved to a different job. And she's been assisting us as we work on these fiscal pieces. So she wanted to add something.
Right, so I just text Caitlin and asked as a reminder. So we also use I keep wanting to call it CAT aid, so I apologize. The special education aid for the budget. We use that budgeted amount to meet our maintenance fiscal support that we need for our IDA grant, which is a grant that we give out to, it's a $47 million grant that we give out to the school districts. We use the sped aid amount, budget amount, to help meet our state fiscal support. So it's important that we keep that budgeted amount and not lower it. Because if we lower it, then we could lose IDA funds. Any questions on that?
Yes, Representative Heath.
Oh, thank you. You know, that was a really critically important point. In terms of maintenance of effort for those, we get a pretty sizable amount of special ed federal funding. Not exactly what we'd like to have, of course, but what is the level of maintenance of effort that you need to see from the general fund budget?
That is a great question. I do not have the answer off the top of my head. Bridget and I are working on that tomorrow. But we use the budgeted amount for that we have for the court ordered students. And we also use a portion of the adequacy funds.
And you should probably mention COVID for this year.
Representative Lynn.
Yes, you know what, I'm sorry, I don't think I really did understand that last part, that if I was understanding you, what you're saying is that you use some part of the special education budget for something beyond what has been shown on the formula of the 3.5 over 3.5 times
So she was
80%.
just
Is that correct?
No, for our maintenance of effort that we have with the federal government for our IDEA grant, we list, she was just stating that we list special education aid and we list the 402 costs that go forward. So both of those go into the maintenance of effort that we have to file with them. So it wasn't that we use the funds, it was just
I
that we
see.
list
Use
both of
We
those.
list the budgeted amounts.
Yeah.
I see. Okay. No, now I understand. Thank you very much.
Representative Bucco?
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. Can we go back one slide to the formula, please? And this
Prorated one?
no,
or
no, that's fine right there. This is probably went right over my head, but how do we determine that the total 99,000? How do we arrive at that figure?
So that's what we're saying that the district spent on the student. They spent the $99,845 on the student in this example. So that was we just took an example of what a district could have paid.
Okay.
And if that student incurred those costs of $99,845, what it would look like as it played out through the formula.
Oh, okay, thank you. I thought that was something, a formula that was in statute or something.
Nope. So it just shows how that formula plays out with these numbers.
Thank you.
Representative Bucco, so how it works for it is, so a school district will go through a year knowing a kid has an IEP and knowing what is in the kid's IEP and recording the different expenses that they are incurring associated with that kid. So at the end of the year, they have Caitlin Davis's IEP and it says all of the services that Caitlin Davis received, and it has the costs associated with those services. That is submitted to the Department of Education with a very thick stack of invoices that show that all of those services were paid for. And then Becky and Lisa and Bridget have a whole team of staff that review all of those invoices for the different districts and determine that those expenses were allowable and appropriate for the child's IEP. And they come up with a total determined amount that is an allowable amount that the state of New Hampshire agrees that was appropriate for that kid. So in this, for this specific example, Caitlin Davis may have had $120,000 worth of expenses associated with her. Some of them might be just related to regular education, so that would not be allowable for submission. And then maybe Caitlin Davis had reimbursement for a service that the Department of Education doesn't allow. Maybe they reimbursed, the school had a cost associated with me that maybe wasn't in my IEP. I was provided it, but if it wasn't not in my IEP, it's not eligible for reimbursement. So at the end of the day, per the review of Becky and her team, they've decided that Caitlin Davis has $99,000 worth of expenses associated with me. Then they say, all right, well, how much was the cap? And they take the cap of, which was $59,000, 3.5 times the average cost per pupil, and saying the district would be responsible for that $40,000. And then we put it through the formula that is the statutory formula.
Yes, thank you very much. I didn't know if that 99 was an imposed cap or something, but
This is just an example.
Thank you.
Representative Petrie, you have a question?
Yes, Madam Chair, thank you. I just heard 402 mentioned, that's court-appointed placements. Could you explain that a little bit?
So we cover costs for See, I don't want to say something wrong now. I'm a little gun shy. I apologize.
So court order works a little bit different than special education aid. So court order is 3 times the estimated cost per pupil. And it works, again, it works different. So once the student reaches cap, then the district submits invoices to us and then we pay the vendor.
And we pay however much is submitted to us. There's no cap on how much we pay to the district for court-ordered placements.
And there's no timeline. So they could submit a student from the previous year or 2 years ago, and we would still pay it.
And it's in the RSA.
Yeah, it's in the RSA.
that We get the rest of special ed funds.
Oh, so if there's an RSA that if there are leftover special education aid funds, that it gets put into the court order funds to be paid out.
Each year. Mhm.
Representative Lynn, you have a question?
Yes, thank you. Can I just ask, can you just tell us generally is the issue of, is this has the local district properly categorized special education expenses or not properly categorize them? Is that something that, is sort of an ongoing issue of contention between the State Department and districts, or is that run sort of pretty smoothly?
I would say that it's pretty smooth. That's the process that we talked about where Caitlin mentioned we have a team of people who come in and they review all of the invoices. And then what happens? Yep, and they look at the invoices that are sent to us and they look at the IEP and if there are questions, we always seek clarification from the district, but the invoices need to match up with what is in the IEP and what the team has determined the student needs.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Could you give us an example if, let's say I have a severe speech problem, okay? And could you give us an example of, and that's what my IEP is for, could you give an example of what might not be agreeable in that case?
So the only things that would not be allowable are things that are not within the IEP. So if you had a speech person and they submitted for something that was not listed in the IEP, say they listed 3 services per week for that speech person, and then they asked us for reimbursement for 5 services a week, we would say no, because it doesn't align with what the IEP states. It states that you're going to provide 3, we're going to reimburse you for those 3. That might be an example. Typically, they don't ask for anything really extraneous, but it does need to align with what the IEP states.
Okay, are there any other questions? Okay, seeing none, I'm sure that everyone will pour through how much your town received, but that's okay. So thank you, Rebecca. We appreciate it, and I think that it has provided some good knowledge for all of us. So thank you, and welcome, Representative Murray. So Caitlin, you want to?
Our next speaker is Eric Falworth, who is
Yeah,
the
excuse me.
administrator.
Representative Petrie had a question.
Oops. Okay. Yes, thank you. I guess now I forgot the question because you got me all nerved up. I know what it was. The slides that you just presented, are they going to be available? Are they going to be sent to us?
I sent them to the LBA, and I believe Mickey has posted them already.
Okay. very good.
Joe, Mickey had indicated earlier that he has already put them in an envelope and mailed them to us. So,
Okay. Very good.
okay.
Thank you very
They
much.
have been emailed to everybody. Last night I emailed them PDF. They're posted on online as well, and the committee is getting hard copies.
Thank you.
I need a Mickey too. He's very helpful. All right, so next up we have Eric Falworth. So Eric Falworth is the administrator of our Career and Tech Education Bureau, which oversees some of our federal and state career and tech education funding, including career and tech education tuition and transportation, which is a line item in the Education Trust Fund. Eric?
Good morning. Thanks, Caitlin. Good morning, everyone. For the record, I'm Eric Falworth. I'm the administrator of the Bureau of Career Development, and I am actually in my home office in Manchester right now. Let's see if I can make this work. Okay, are you, I'm assuming you are all seeing my screen now?
Yes, we are.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, so as part of our funding for career and tech education, there is a line item referred to as tuition and transportation. And this tuition and transportation is exclusively reimbursement for CTE students who are attending programs outside of their district. So I need to make sure that's very clear that, for example, Manchester has multiple high schools. And if students are attending Manchester West, but then travel to MST for CTE, those costs are not included as part of this. Those are completely locally subsidized transportation costs. So it is only for students schools sending students to out-of-district career and tech education centers. The transportation portion is reimbursed to the sending school. They outlay the money for transportation and they are reimbursed. The tuition portion is reimbursed directly to the CTE center. So the money goes in two different places. It is reimbursed each year on or before December 1st for the previous year. So this past December, we just reimbursed the schools for the previous year's tuition and transportation costs. As detailed in Ed Rule 1305.02, the transportation portion is reimbursed first from the fund, and then the remaining dollars are utilized to reimburse up to 75% of the tuition cost. If there is not sufficient funds to reimburse the full 75% of the tuition cost, then the total remaining is divided by the number of eligible students, and a set amount per student is sent to the schools. Prior to 2014, it was done proportionally, but the rule was changed in 2014, so it is just a flat amount per student that is then distributed to each of the CTE centers.
So, excuse me, before you go on.
Sure, absolutely.
Is the sending school district then responsible for the difference between what the state provides and what they have identified as the cost?
Yes. So initially the sending school district will pay 25%, with the state paying up to 75%. Once the full cycle comes through, if the 75% is not available, the sending school district will get a supplemental bill.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. So the next few slides are for more for informational purposes for you that you'll see when you have the packets. We've included a map to show where all of the schools are. And this map includes not only our CTE centers, but also the community colleges that are affiliated with career and tech programs. So the different colors are the regions. So each high school in a region is assigned to a CTE center. So you can see how the distribution is amongst our 20 regions. 5 of those regions are in Vermont because our high schools are actually closer to Vermont CTE centers than they are to New Hampshire-based ones. So our students travel over to Vermont for their CTE programs. And in that case, the New Hampshire school pays the full tuition, and then they are reimbursed from the state. So those are the only instances where the sending school is reimbursed for the tuition from the state, because we do not send our state money into Vermont.
Representative Heath, you had a question, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I do indeed. CTE is such a magnificent program. And I'm happy to hear that we did try and increase the funding during the last session. But it still troubles me that we weren't able to fully fund the tuition and transportation. So the school districts didn't get that full amount. Tell me about your numbers. I'm on an international committee with NCSL, and we're really talking about the importance and the need to really fully expand CTE programs. How are our numbers, enrollments across the state? Are they increasing? Are we seeing more students, or just what's happening?
Sure. No, thank you for asking. And yes, although, as you're probably aware, our high school population numbers are decreasing, our CTE numbers are actually increasing. We're close to a total of about 10,000 students participating in CTE each year. And so that number, this year is a little strange for a variety of reasons, but we have been watching our CTE numbers increase. And we are attempting to continue that increase actively, trying to find ways to increase those numbers.
Madam Chair, if I could just ask a follow-up, please?
Certainly.
That was great. That's good news. Tell me about Carl Perkins funding. Has that risen? And is it helping you in your efforts, or where are we now in terms of federal funding for CTE centers?
Yes, so that also is rising. So we're very happy with that as well. In our current year's allocation is just over $6.1 million. And we just received our estimate for next year, which will be 6.5 million. So federally, they are working on increasing it. There is a push to double it at the federal level. We're very hopeful because our newly added Secretary of Education is a CTE graduate.
Good.
So we are very excited, and he is a community college graduate as well. So we're very excited about the opportunity that he might increase that funding. But yes, so it is $6.5 million that is allocated to our schools that provide a large supplement. And that's what the intention is. If on the off chance Perkins disappeared, the intent is that our CTE program should still be able to maintain and continue. So the Perkins is used for add-ons, new additional equipment, et cetera.
Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate the fact that CTE student enrollment is increasing, but I am very distressed about the fact that the sending school enrollment is not necessarily doing as well as I think it should. And so is the state doing anything to help that?
Thank you for asking. We are actively working on this. We had hired last year a consultant to work with us to dig deep into that question. They've just finished their report. There were a couple of typos that were being fixed, and it will be published this week, actually, up on our website and distributed through a press release. We found that about 75% of the students participating in CTE are from the host high schools. Now, the fact that there are 28 host high schools and well over 100 school districts in the state, there's a disconnect there somewhere. And so we are, part of the consultant's work was to now go, okay, what were the issues? Why are students from sending schools not participating? And start working with our regional CTE centers and our school districts to combat those issues and find out what's the best way to get more students enrolled. We have multiple options based on the challenges, and we're about to start working with some of our CTE districts to figure it out.
Would you mind sending that study to Mickey so that he can forward it to us? Because
absolutely,
I live in a area where we don't have any sending students, and everyone that attends our high school has the opportunity to participate in CTE, but that's not the norm. And so I need to dig into this a little bit more, because it may be, maybe, obviously not for this year, but maybe for next year, we might need to change some legislation to try to even out the attendance at CTEs.
Thank you. I'm happy to provide whatever information I can as part of that conversation.
Thank you. Representative Murray?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and apologies for being late. That bill went way longer than it should have, especially since it passed unanimously. Everyone has to talk. I may be jumping the gun. With all your students, will you be going over areas of study, areas that are particularly appealing to the different students that are coming to you? Thank you. You may do that coming along, so thank you.
I can certainly talk about that. And actually the next 2 pages in my presentation and that you'll have in your packet is the grid that we publish. It's also on our website it lists across the top. Let me shrink this just a little tiny bit. It lists across the top all of our centers. And then down the left-hand side, it lists all of our programs of study. And they're broken into 16 large categories. So for example, in the agricultural, food, and natural resources, we have assorted agricultural programs, environmental studies, forestry, animal sciences, all fit in that large, broad category. And then it just works its way down. Construction, arts and technology, business, education, finance, government, health science, hospitality, human services, which in New Hampshire is strictly cosmetology, IT, law, public policy, security, manufacturing, marketing, STEM, and transportation. And so each of our centers has a different mix of programs. Those programs are locally based. So every 4 years, a school must conduct a local needs assessment where it is determined what the needs of that local community are that could support the CTE programs. The Perkins Funds are very specific in that they are only eligible for programs that are high skill, high need, high wage. And so programs must fit into one of those categories. And I hate to use the example because I do come from an artsy background. A theater program, for example, in New York City would be eligible for CTE funds because there's obviously a community for it. In New Hampshire, we have a couple of them, but we cannot add additional programs because New Hampshire as a community will not support 75 graduates every year in theater arts. We just don't have the economy to support that. So that's part of the local needs assessment to make sure that we can support the programs. Manufacturing, health science, auto tech are very popular programs in New Hampshire. They're very well supported by the industries in New Hampshire. We could theoretically open a health science program at every center and not produce enough graduates to meet the health industry needs for employment in New Hampshire. Our auto programs similarly fill up consistently. Our students work hand in hand with the local dealership associations and all walk right into jobs, or they can then continue on to the community college for their auto programs.
Representative Murray, you have a question?
No, I'm so sorry. Just distracted. Forgot to put my hand down. So sorry. Apologies.
You don't have to apologize. We all have these problems. Okay, I do have a couple of questions. On the career tech advisory boards for
Yes.
Schools that receive students from other areas, are there advisory board members from the sending schools?
Yes, so there are 2 separate types of advisory boards at the CTE centers. There's the regional advisory board, which is at the center level, and that is made up of representatives from all of the sending districts. So it ideally is somebody from the school as well as somebody from the school board. And then large employers from the entire region. And that is the group that looks at the school as a whole, talks about what types of programs should be offered at the school, as well as works on recruitment opportunities for the students from the sending schools. Each of the programs then also has an advisory board made up of industry people from the entire region.
Okay, so the sending schools are in fact represented on the regional board.
They are.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
And when the 4-year study is done, do they look at communities outside of where the Career Tech Center is located? In other words, out to the sending schools?
Yes, the local needs assessment is for their entire catchment region. So as you saw on that map, so for example, this is Concord's region. They have students coming from high schools in all of these towns. So their regional advisory board is made up of representatives from all of those sending communities. And their local needs assessment is because that's where those students will be going back to work.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yes. And they may also extend beyond that. You know, we look at, depending on the region, if they're looking for a new program, we can take into account average drive time. If somebody is, you know, averaging 20 to 30-minute drive time, what are the job opportunities within that catchment area to offer a program?
Thank you.
Yes. And so, for example, our newest program that we just launched is aviation. And that is because the FAA actually approached us that they have a large need over the next 10 years for employees. So we have launched this year one. We will have possibly 2 additionals that add next year. And we have 3 more schools backing up beyond that to add aviation. And then we'll be working on recreation management as the next one.
Yeah, I will say that the aviation program that we have here in Conway has been extremely popular. And I'm sure that as it is brought online in other areas, that it will be as popular. So it's a good thing.
Your school is the lead. They hit the ground running. So they've become the sort of the gold standard for our programs. But you have no sending students, so your students are eligible. Everyone in the building learns about the programs. Okay, so the next chart in here goes back just over 10 years, I guess to 11, 12 years. It lists each town that has received tuition or transportation money. So as you go through the list at home, you may find that there are completely missing towns. And that could be because even if they obviously have students from there, they may not have a high school. So therefore, their students are attending a different town's high school. So that town's high school is the one that is receiving the reimbursement for the travel. And so it just lists all the way down for each town what the amount is, and all the way down at the bottom you'll see it totals down to the $9 million, which we had for the past 2 years. And then the following chart is the breakdown of each town and whether they have a tuition payment or a transportation payment. And some will have both. Any school that sends to Vermont will have both, again, because they pay the tuition, full tuition, and have reimbursed. But then also several of our towns like Claremont is in a region where there are 2 CTE centers, one in Claremont and one in Newport. And so Claremont could be a sending school if they're sending students to the cosmetology program in Newport. And they are also a receiving school that students from Newport and the other surrounding towns send students to Claremont, so they will receive tuition. So that is why some will have both. And so this just shows how the money was broken down this past year. And so for the formula of how it happens, each year, the CTE centers will provide to our office the cost of a CTE education. So it is a percentage of the total student cost for education. It ranges between 20 and 40%. Many centers just pick one as an all-encompassing comprehensive, but schools like Dover, you can see they have a very wide variety of programs. They cost out each one separately. And again, it is between 20 and 40%. So that is the tuition number that they'll put on the AV1 form that they submit to us per semester. Comes up with what the total tuition will be for the year. And then this is the state's potential 75%. There's then the number of students that attended CTE for the year. And you will notice that we do have percentage of students because if a student only attends for part of the year, we only pay for that part of the tuition. So they report attendance 3 times over the course of the semester. So if a student only attends for a part of that semester, then we won't pay the full tuition for the full semesters they didn't attend. So we do have partial students. Multiplies across. And so theoretically, Berlin would have received for 75% tuition reimbursement of $115,962. However, based on the amount available, there was only 77,000 available. So that $38,000 was short, and they would then be sending bills out to their sending schools to make up that difference. So the sending school will get a secondary. You will notice there are some positive numbers because of the way the formula allocation happens. Conval, for example, 75% of their tuition cost is $2,800. The tuition payment based on the formula allocation was just over $3,000 per student. So they actually came in the black $5,000 at the end of the year. It's the rare occasion. Several schools, like you'll see Exeter, was short $382,000. So they then had to go back to their school districts for that supplemental funds.
Excuse me, Representative Murray, you have a question?
Yep, I do. Just clarification. So the request for funds that goes back to the community, is that something that would eventually be paid for with an increase in property taxes?
I won't talk to that. I don't know where that might come from. School districts typically have a line item in their budget that are sending schools that they've allocated a specific amount of money from their school budget to send to the CTE centers for tuition.
All right, thank you.
Yes.
Representative Heath, you have a question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick one. Do you think, Eric, that the cost to the sending schools in their budget is ever a deterrent to attending the regional center?
We have heard it. I do not have definitive fact, but from the consultants, that did come up, that school districts, it's a conversation school districts have. I will tell you that we're happy to fight that conversation anytime, because legislatively, the law states that any student who wants to go can attend. So if a student applies and is accepted into a CTE center, the school district under the law cannot say no. We've never heard somebody say no. Never heard of a school district, a student saying, I wanted to go and they wouldn't let me. But conversations with our consultants were that the cost does come up as part of school district budget conversation, for sure.
Mary, I think the bigger problem is not the cost, but the fact that the children that are going to the consolidated CTE centers are losing out on some amount of educational, whatever, every day that they're attending the CTE. And I don't know how I know we can't crack that in the budget, but we may be able to work on something that I don't know, but that's always been the big problem with kids going to the CTEs around the state. We'll see.
Madam Chair, if I may,
Please.
I agree with you, and it's the lost time that kids have when they have to ride the buses. But I really hope that we can figure out something, because I think it's a loss, and we need those areas desperately in our employment environment. So I hope we can do something. Thank you.
Representative Murray, you still had your hand up?
Mistake again. I'm sorry. I'm still distracted. I'll do better. I promise.
Don't worry about it.
Thank you. And yes, in our study, that was a big piece, is the travel time and the lost or the schedule conflict that a student is in, AP English at 9 in the morning, and it's the only time their school offers it. And so they cannot take the bus to go to the CTE center at the same time. Part of our conversations with our CTE centers and our sending schools will be around embedded credits to find out if there are opportunities that the students can earn those other credits while they are taking their CTE classes to eliminate some of that missed class time. But that is a very complicated conversation amongst 9 sending school districts and 1 CTE center. So with this tuition, if the state would have fully funded the 75%, including plus the alt ed tuition, which is also a small amount included in here, and the transportation, would have been a total of almost $12 million, which would be a shortfall of just shy of $3 million if we're using the current 9 million. And that's based on the current transportation formula, which is what I will talk about next. Oh, so I'm sorry. So this past year, the tuition rate was $3,617 per student, was what was when it was divided by the 2,500 students that are taking part in CTE from sending schools. So the transportation cost per education ed rules for transportation, the schools are reimbursed 10 cents per mile per student, which you'll note the bus costs the same whether there are 10 students on it or 40 students on it, but that is the regulation, is they are reimbursed at 10 cents per mile per student. So this form will show what the school districts reported their cost was for the busing and what was actually reimbursed for the busing. And so the total cost of busing to send students to CTE was $2.6 million. Based on the formula of 10 cents per mile per student, we reimbursed them $508,000. So in addition to the $3 million shortfall from the tuition, if we were to fully fund transportation, it would be an additional $2 million. So we're now hitting a $5 million shortfall of fully funding tuition and transportation. So we do have legislation in this year to change the regulation so that transportation is fully funded. However, it does not increase the total in the budget. So transportation will be fully funded up front, and then that leftover money is divided amongst the school, the students. So it just lowers the amount available for tuition, and the schools get hit with that secondary tuition. So we borrowed from Peter to pay Paul, but we didn't want transportation to be the reason that a school wasn't sending a student, that they were spending so much on transportation.
Okay, so has that passed the legislature already?
It is currently it is in our CTE bill that is working its way through the legislature.
Okay, so it hasn't finished.
It has
up.
not gone anywhere yet.
Okay, so that will probably take effect later on outside the budget cycle.
Correct. It would be next year.
Okay, thank you. Well, next year's in the budget cycle.
Right.
So.
It would be, well, it would take effect. We just wouldn't, unless this year's budget money is increased, the schools for the next 2 years will be reimbursed fully for busing and end up having to pay more for tuition.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Yes. And that is the end of my slide. So I'm open for other questions if there are any.
Does anyone have any additional questions for Eric? We appreciate your very much what.
Thank you. I did have one other point, and Becky reminded me of it when she did hers. This $9 million is also part of our maintenance of effort.
Towards the Perkins grant?
Towards our Perkins grant, yes.
Representative Heath.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Eric. Again, this is used for maintenance of effort. Do you have enough, or what else do you use for that?
Sure. So I actually have a maintenance of effort chart. I'm assuming you're seeing this now, new chart?
Yes, we are.
Okay. So our maintenance of effort is any state monies that goes towards CTE. So salaries for all the staff in my office, all of the office expenses, our membership dues for our national membership for CTEs is part of is a state fund. Any travel that we do in state, and then this $9 million. And so based on this, for this current year, for FY21, assuming all of our, we're assuming $12,000 in state travel, which we may not actually do this year because we didn't travel a lot. We are anticipating that we will surpass our MOE requirement by about $145,000. So we just make it. If we do not meet our MOE for our Perkins funds next year would be reduced by the amount we miss. And we are responsible for repaying the federal government for the difference that we missed. So we get hit twice. I have a phenomenal BA who works this chart to make sure that we do not miss our MOE. And so she has actually put it out several years based on anticipated raises, et cetera, in salaries. And so we're looking at next year of a possible shortfall, but that really depends on where we land this year. Because if we don't spend quite as much this year, we're okay as long as we meet our MOE. But she's keeping an eye on it for us. And so that's something that we'll keep an eye on as we move from year to year.
Yeah, Eric, maybe you could send this little chart to us since it didn't come.
Yes.
Representative Petrie, you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Are we going to expand CTE or within the facilities we have now, or are we going to have more? One of the things when I was on the Farmington School Board, we actually changed centers. We went to Wolfboro versus Tri-City. And, we found that our kids were spending more time on the bus than they were in the classroom.
So we're looking at all options. We are looking at how we can offer CTE programs at non-regional centers. The challenge being student population and critical mass. We would not be offering an auto program at every high school. That just cost-wise doesn't make sense. But what I refer to as the more didactic programs, the business-based programs, the computer-based programs, most high schools have facilities that could run those programs. The question is, would you have enough students at every high school to run that program? And so that's where this consultant is going to come in handy for us to try to figure out what the best way is to expand access to those CTE programs. And it may mean setting up regional programs at more comprehensive high schools. So a student, if they were looking to do a business program, may only have to travel to the next town over. So it's less travel time, but then that ends up being more travel costs for the school district because now they have 2 buses that they're sending. So we're trying to balance all of those and figure out the answer. We don't know the answer. Massachusetts had decided on the model of regional CTE high schools. where if you wanted to go, you just transferred to that high school, you went for 4 years, and then that alleviated all of these challenges. Well, they've now maxed out those high schools and they have wait lists. So now they're trying to figure out, now what do we do? And our CTE programs are popping up at more high schools. So they're having the same problem we have. How do we get more students involved? So we're looking at all the model options. There may be more options like MST, where there is a 4-year high school that's showing up and students will just transfer there. Vermont has a model where a student can spend the entire day at the CTE center and complete a program in 1 year. So that way the schedule problem isn't as bad. They just go for the whole day and then go back, but it's only 1 year. So they'll go for their 10th grade or their 11th grade year out of high school and that's it. So we're looking at all different models. We're open to ideas and suggestions, absolutely.
Okay, thank you very much, Eric. And Caitlin, what kind of great things do you have next for us?
Okay, so next up we have Amy Clark. So Amy Clark has a variety of different topics to talk to you about today. I don't know what you guys want to do as far as breaks or whatnot. Obviously, we're going to come back after lunch. But what do you guys typically break at 12 or 12:30?
Oh, we figure it out depending upon what's what's going on. It doesn't.
All right, so Amy, the first topic, she has 3 topics. Building aid, which is a fairly complex topic. I think, every time Amy gets into that, the committee has a lot of questions. So I would say that might go up until lunch, and then she can do her 2 quicker topics after lunch. Maybe that, planning wise, we can see how that goes, or maybe building aid will stretch. But so Amy will be talking about building aid, and then also the public school infrastructure fund and lease aid for chartered public schools.
Great, thank you for having me. So again, my name is Amy Clark, and for the record, I work for the Department of Education for the Bureau of School Safety and Facility Management. So good to see you, especially Representative Umberger. It's so good to see you back, and some friendly faces. So that's always eases the pain of having to talk to a committee when you know a couple of the faces in the crowd. But here is, not that this is painful at all, of course, for us. So here is a summary of the building aid program. And in my packet, I have these 6 things that we'll go over, some of them more at length and some of them just so that you have them for your reference. I have a summary of the building aid program, I have the building aid rates, I have a tail graph and a list of the applications, as well as a list of the current payments that we're making, and a list of some other projects.
I'm not seeing your screen yet. Have you started putting anything up?
I have. I am sorry about that. Let's see what happened. There again. I think. Can you see it? Got it? Okay.
It's on now.
Okay, great. So there's my contact information right there. And you should have all of these handouts, but here is, there's a 1-page summary of the program. It has my name, my contact information, if you ever have some more detailed questions you want answered. The law and the rules are cited there as well. So simply put, building aid is grant funds to support local school districts in meeting the cost of construction or reconstruction projects. That is the source, the state funds that they use to tap into our building aid grants. The grants typically, the grants range from 30 to 60%. That's the state share of those grants, with less affluent communities being at the 60%, more affluent communities being at the 30%. I'd just like to note that even though the range is 30 to 60, the actual average rate is closer to the 30% range. So it's weighted, the formula is weighted so the average community gets 38%. The funding source is now the Education Trust Fund, which Caitlin mentioned. The way that grants are paid to schools it's important to cover because we're going to talk about the tail or these obligated payments. So keep in mind during the presentation that there's two types of ways that building aid has been funded. Building aid has been around since the 1940s. All the way up through 2012, the law said that building aid was going to be paid over the life of a bond. So a school took out a 20-year bond, building aid would be paid every year on the term of the bond during their bond payment. In 2013, the law was changed, and the law in 2013 now says that the state pays 80% of that grant amount before construction and 20% upon completion. So instead of making payments over 20 years, now building aid only makes two payments, just two, and that's it. One, 80% upfront, and then 20% upon completion. So for a quick example, if a school district had a 20-year bond, and let's say their school costs to construct it $40 million, and let's say, for example, for easy numbers, their building aid rate was 50%. The state is going to pay 20 million, and the local share is going to be 20 million. So prior to 2013, that grant amount, that state grant amount of 20 million would have been paid out in $1 million every year for 20 years. If that project happened after 2013, that project would have been paid 16 million upfront, that's the 80%, so $16 million upfront before they even start construction, and then 4 million upon completion. And so when we were paying on the term of a bond, those are called obligated payments. And if you can think about it, it was a 20-year bond is a common example. We do have a couple of 30-year bonds, but for the most part, a 20-year bond is pretty typical. That means we are still paying on projects that are 20 years old, or just finishing up those payments. So we'll get back to that in a little bit more, but that's the kind of the summary of the funding structure of building aid. Here's a little bit of the history that you'll have. It's a short history here, but building aid, again, has been around since the 1940s, and has has been appropriated to meet demand all the way up till about 2007. And so keep in mind, money was appropriated to meet demand. So schools came to the Department of Education, they proposed a construction project. We collected, okay, this is going to cost you this much, we're going to pay you this much. We reported it to the legislature, and the legislature appropriated enough money to cover what schools needed. Now, that doesn't mean they could put in a swimming pool, and it doesn't mean they could put an athletic turf field in. There were caps on building aid. There are still caps on what is eligible and what's not. But those eligible costs, they could report, hey, I need, we're expanding, or, this wall is falling down. Then those are the types of projects that in 2008 and 2009, we all remember there was quite a difficult time at that time financially. And so the state did not have enough money to pay those obligated funds. So I had past projects, but we could not meet those payments, and payments were diminished. So we asked the legislature for so much money, and they didn't appropriate as much as the schools needed. And therefore payments were prorated to about 95%. So not a significant shortfall, but a shortfall nonetheless. In 2010, there was even more of a significant shortfall. And what happened in 2010 is the state was paying about $49 million per year, each year, on obligated payments. And what the state said is, we can't meet that obligation, but we want to make the payments. So the state took out their own bond to pay the obligated payments. I see some people shaking their heads. So that's probably the appropriate response. I think most people would have that response. So what that means is the state took out a bond to pay schools on their bond. Keep in mind that practice is now prohibited by law. Shortly after, somebody said, the state's not going to do that anymore. But either way, it was done in 2010. And that created it was a 20-year bond that created a 20-year bond for those obligated payments. And we'll see that show up a little bit later too, but that happened in 2010. What also happened in 2010 is House Bill 2 put an official moratorium on school building aid for 2 years. The state said that we'll fund those obligated payments from past projects, but from here on out, for the next 2 years, we are not going to pay on any new school construction projects. And 2 years went by. And then in 2012, 2013, that next biennium, that moratorium was extended for another 2 years. Also, what happened in 2013, the building aid laws were rewritten somewhat significantly. The key things that they did in 2013 was that they put a cap, or the legislation now has a cap on building aid. And it says that there shall not be the appropriation shall not be any larger than $50 million per year. And that exists today. So there is a cap on building aid of $50 million per year. And what that cap did was it now created, instead of being able to fund on demand, it created a ranking and a way that the Department of Education has to decide how to give that money out. Well, it wasn't a problem in 2012 and 2013 because we were still in a moratorium. And that moratorium actually lasted for 10 years. So from 2014 to 2019, there were no new projects because of the moratorium in RSA 19850 in the building aid law. And so although the law was changed in 2013, it really didn't have an impact because we did not have any funds to actually award schools. In 2018, there is one exception, and in 2018, Hinsdale Elementary School was in a somewhat of an emergency, and so the legislature opened up building aid just for Hinsdale Elementary School for that one project. So aside from that, the state stayed in that moratorium. In 2020 and 2021, our current biennium, the moratorium officially ended. And by that, I mean House Bill 2 no longer said that there was a moratorium on building aid. The appropriation for fiscal 20 was the max amount of $50 million. So for the first time ever in 2020, the state appropriated the full $50 million of building aid. And in 2021, the state appropriated $39 million for building aid. And there's probably a couple of reasons that that wasn't 50 million. Well, one, it's another $11 million, but also because there is a list of projects and the amount that was appropriated was enough to cover 3 of the 5 projects that applied. And 3 of the 5 projects that applied, well, I should say the bottom 2 projects that were not funded had not passed their warrant. And matter of fact, they didn't the subsequent year either. And so there may have been, maybe that was one of the reasons. All I know is I was able to fund the top 3 projects. Those top 3 projects, of that 50 million and 39 million for the biennium, that included all my obligated payments plus $8.6 million for these 3 projects. $8.6 million of grant money for 3 projects. These projects were relatively small. They were just relatively small projects. So there's that summary page. Again, a lot on all that page, but that's sort of the summary of the program. Here are the rates. If you're curious as to, hey, what does my town get or what do other towns get? This is, you'll have this in your packet and it's just a list of the building aid rates. Those rates are recalculated every year, but they are based on median family income and equalized valuation per pupil. What is great about the formula, as somebody who has to calculate it, it is a ranking of those, the ranking of median family income and the ranking of equalized valuation per pupil over a 5-year period. So what that helps schools is because it's ranked, median family income, sometimes people say, well, it's not really all that accurate. I've heard before, well, this is a ranking. So it doesn't necessarily matter if it's perfectly accurate or it keeps that snapshot. If median family income goes down in a certain area, sometimes everybody's goes down and their rankings don't change a whole lot. So what happens with this formula is you might see somebody is at 45%. They are likely going to be at 45% this year as well, and so forth. Some of them do jump categories, but not for the most part, those rates are pretty steady. For planning purposes, that helps schools out a lot, having a steady formula like that. So you have that in your packet. And then on page 5, on page 5, you should have this graph. And on this graph, I will spend a little bit of time on this graph because I think it's helpful. It kind of tells you a little bit of the story about where we're going for building aid. The y-axis is in millions, so the y-axis conveniently goes from 0 to 50 million. The x-axis is fiscal years. So if you recall, I said funding was fully funded in fiscal 20. You can see that bar goes all the way up to 50 million. The bottom, now how that's broken out is the bottom dark blue bar, this bottom one here, are the obligated payments that are given to those past projects. Those bonds are out there. They're for all projects that are already built. That's the second column of data in your table here. The second column, obligated payments to students. That light blue bar, the one on the top, solid bar, is that 2010 bond payment. If you recall, I said it was a 20-year bond payment. You can see our last payment is fiscal 2030. That's state bond to pay those obligated payments from 2010. That is the third column. And you can see in 2030, we'll make our last payment, the state will make their last payment, and that will be done. Dark blue bar to schools, the light blue bar is that 2010 bond payment. These little dashed lines are the payments that were for new projects for the first time, at least in over 10 years. So here's the new projects here, 6.7 million in the first year of the biennium, 1.9 million in the second year of the biennium. Those new funds funded 3 projects, the 3 rate. Also,
Amy, yeah, Amy, before you go on, it shows the dark blue as obligated payments to schools.
Correct.
What are those?
Those are the bond payments on past construction projects. So,
Okay.
Yep, got
Okay.
it?
Yep, I got it. So we still have 30 million basically due off the bonding that we did in 2010. Is that correct?
So in 2010, if you could see, do you see this? Can you see my cursor on your end? You guys can?
Yes.
So in 2022, this biennium coming up, 2022, the state will have an $8.1 million payment on that 2010 bond. We'll owe 27 million to schools for those past projects. We'll have that $8.1 million bond payment, certificate payment, and then that total of those two together is that 35 million.
Okay, thank you very much. So this is not new funding. This is old funding that we're paying down.
Correct. Yep. So all of those solid bars are all just past. Those are projects that are already done.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And so the total of those, so let's see, the total of, so we're coming up, let me focus on fiscal 1 to 2 and 23, since that's the one you guys are, I'll plug this on right here. You can see the total of my obligated payments to schools plus that 2010 bond totals 35 million. And we can see that on the graph. If you look under fiscal 22, there's the obligation, and there's the 2010 bond, and if you see right there, that's 35 million. So we are going to be paying 35 million as long as it's appropriated in that manner. The second year of the biennium, that'll go down a little bit to 32 million. You can see why it's called the tail. It looks like a tail, but it looks like that because every year we continue to pay off projects that are, we're making our final payment to somebody this year. And those projects that were built 28 years ago, I'll no longer have to pay them. If you move over to the $50 million column, it says $50 million less debt service. What this column represents is if building aid were fully funded, and when I say fully funded, I mean up to the maximum extent of the law of $50 million per year. What this would allow is this much money for new projects. So if building aid were fully funded in 22 and 23, it would give 15 million the first year of the biennium and 18 million in the second year of the biennium for new construction projects. That's what would be available for new construction projects. That total for the biennium is just these two numbers added together is 32.1.
Yeah, the debt service is maybe let me think about that, but I'm not convinced that that I know it comes out of the Education Trust Fund. I got that, but I'm not sure that we need to look at it as reducing the amount that's available for new construction, but I'll have to.
That's actually a good question. Caitlin, do you want me to answer that, or you look like
You can answer it. Yep.
Okay, she's my boss, so I'll defer to her if she wants. But Representative Umberger, you are I'm glad you're thinking like that. That would free up a little bit more money for new construction projects. At one time, that is how the law was interpreted, and we would take 50 million and subtract out our obligated payments. But I believe 3 years ago, Caitlin, correct me if I'm wrong, 3 years ago, somebody else had a different interpretation and said that we had to include those debt service payments in that $50 million subtraction. So somebody has looked at it and changed sort of how we look at that.
So we had a legal interpretation from the AG's office, and they determined that. I do want to just clarify too that the debt service is actually not in the Education Trust Fund, only the obligated schools to payment. So like that true tail, that is the portion that's in the Education Trust Fund. The remaining amount, I believe, is in the Treasury's portion of the budget, but Mickey can.
Yeah, I think you're right.
It is.
Yeah. So these two pieces are in different places, right? The Education Trust Fund is here and Treasury is here. However, for me, or for other schools, when they're looking at funding new projects, I have to include both as the total debt service less the 50 million. Therefore, that would give me a resulting $32 million for new projects if building aid were fully funded in fiscal 22 and 23.
And can I point something out real quick? House Bill 594, which passed the House at the end of February, is referred to finance. And that bill, and Amy can speak more to it, but that bill turns that $50 million ceiling into a floor. So that's where these 2 years where Amy's doing the $50 million exercise comes into play. This committee will have to consider that bill as part of the work it does this month.
Thank you, Matt. Representative Petrie?
Yes, Madam Chair, thank you. I'm looking at the 20 and 21 at the on 20, you got 6.7 million allocated for construction projects. How come the 21 year doesn't show that to the full 50 million, or is that just the other part of the chart show that?
No, that's a good question. So that 13 million that you're seeing there was if building aid were fully funded to 50 million. Building aid was not fully funded. It was only funded to 39 million that year instead of 50 million. So that's why this 13 million. This is what the legislature could have appropriated, but they did not. They did not appropriate 19.2 million for the biennium. Instead, they appropriated 8.6. 6.7 in fiscal 2020, which is there. So it was fully funded there. But then this year was not fully funded. It's the only 1.9 instead of 13 million, only 1.9 million is funded.
Thank you.
Representative Bucco, you have a question? Please unmute.
I'm trying to get,
You're still muted, Representative Bucco.
okay, sorry. So my question was, the chart shows the blue, the dark blue is obligated payments, and plus the light blue is what was bonded, but all of the blue equals the tail. That's called the tail, right? And it does not,
Correct.
it doesn't include the two new construction amounts of 6.7 plus 1.9.
Correct.
That's
And-
new.
Correct. And recall that those projects are now paid differently. So since 2013, although it's 2013, we just didn't have it. That was when the new law was in place of how we pay projects. But in 2013, that law said we're no longer going to have a tail. I'm going to fund all those projects. So when I said I pay 80% of the project up front and 20% upon completion, that 20% I'm actually required to encumber. And so this 6.7 and 1.9 covers all payments for those three projects. And so those payments won't drag on with this tail. They're done.
Oh, thank you.
And similarly, if building aid were fully funded, this 32 million would be blips here. If they would be, okay, I'm going to spend this money, I'm going to give projects the 32 million, and we're not going to talk about it in 2040 about how much I owe them.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, by the way, Tom, I think you voted for this 80-20 split when we finally got it through the legislature. But Representative Heath, you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And Amy, thank you. You do such a fabulous job explaining all of this. My question is this. In the governor's budget, we have $30 million dedicated to infrastructure. Would not that be more useful if we took that 30 million and put it in building aid? And is that too loaded a question to ask you?
No, I'm not going to answer that question. I'm working at home and Caitlin can't even kick me under the desk. But I know, no, I am going to talk about the public school infrastructure fund. So you'll see the differences between the two funds, and that's really a decision. The public school infrastructure fund and school building aid are different things. They have the word infrastructure in them, but they are different funding. So I'll present what public school infrastructure fund is, and you can decide where that $30 million goes.
Thank you.
Mary, I would agree that was a very loaded question, and not one that we should ask Amy to answer, but I can guarantee you that we will be debating that issue when we start doing our line by line. So
Thank you, Madam Chair. I apologize.
no problem. Tom or Joe, you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, no, it's not a question. I just want to thank the members of the panel for a great presentation, and I have to leave, and I reluctantly. So you folks have a good day, and my wife's got to have surgery, so I need to leave. So thank you very much.
All right, take care.
Good luck to your wife.
Thanks.
Okay, Amy, do you have any other great information for us?
I do, but I think we've gone through a bulk of it, even though my number of slides won't tell the story, but the rest of it is relatively fast. Here, the next piece is the list of the projects that have applied for building aid this time around. So it's a biennium process for them. They have to apply for this funding that potentially will come or potentially not. And this is a list of those projects. It is simply in order of SAU. So you can see, it's hard to read them. It's more for you to see the handout in front of you, but there's a description of the project. There's a list of the schools. There's 12 of them. Their project costs are here. Their building aid rate, the total building aid amount is there. And then I added a column to show where they are in their local end of things, whether they're already approved, they're getting ready for approval. Note that Allenstown is going to vote this March, and their warrant article is subject to receiving building aid because they are not going to be able to fund this project without building aid. I just want to leave that is the one that's subject to building aid. A couple of schools have decided we're not even going to vote on it because we just don't know the status of building aid and we're going to wait 2 years. Some schools might also be waiting because they're just undecided because of COVID, what their future is. So that could be other reasons that they're holding. And then there are a couple of schools that are passed and they haven't done any construction. So they're eligible for building aid, but they're just holding off to see if they could get secure funding. So there's a list of the projects again, the summary is there, but really I think this is maybe it's the take home message is that it's $270 million worth of construction. They're seeking $104 million of state aid. If you recall from the graph, if building aid were fully funded, I would have $32 million at most in the biennium. So $104 million of projects seeking money for construction with the law currently at the cap would only grant $32 million for construction.
Amy, I just have a question, then Mary will, or Representative Heath will, if you don't mind. I noticed as I went down through there that there were lots of people that don't have anything going to the voters for a bond. So the 104 million could not possibly be spent in this biennium. Is that correct?
No, because
Or I shouldn't say spent, obligated.
yeah, it could because they would have they could go next March because it's a biennium. You know, I could offer. So, for example, let's say this list is ranked. It's not, but I would go to the top of the list and I would offer Allenstown $19 million of their building aid. I'm sorry for scrolling, but I'm just going to see what these numbers are. This 32 million is 15 million in the first year of the biennium, 18 million in the second year of the biennium. Again, that's assuming building aid were fully funded to that 50 million. I would have 15 million the first year and 18 the second year. So this is the list for both years. So if this were in order, I would offer, I only have 15, but I'd offer 19 to Allenstown. They would get their second piece of it the following year of the biennium. But I really just need one of these projects to pass and my money goes just like that. Well, I already know, I already have a couple of schools that have already passed. This is a $33 million grant award right here. So the first year of the biennium won't be a problem. The second year of the biennium, getting an additional amount of money, they start at the top of the list again. Let's say Allenstown did not pass, but they could try again next March. They could go to vote next March. If they did pass, they would then get offered on that second year. So this money will go because I have more money that has already passed than that has.
Okay, Representative Heath, if you would, and then I'll follow up with a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Amy, we've had a number of projects that were done previous to being able to pay to any of the school districts. I think Dover is one of them. am I correct that those older projects are no longer available for funding? It seems to me that I think we passed a law that said they weren't. Is that true? I can't, I'm just not sure.
That's correct. So if you built during the moratorium, essentially you have to be approved for building aid prior to construction. That's what the law says. So if you built without approval, then you're not eligible to apply for it. Which House Bill 594, it's not in there right now. It was removed from House Bill 594. It comes up every 2 years to fund these projects that were built during the moratorium.
So, Amy, you had indicated that we had not spent all of the money that was allocated in 2021. Am I correct in that?
You are correct. I don't believe I said that, but this amount of money, the 6.7 million is done and gone. This 1.9 million was, when all said and done, those 3 projects, some of their costs were not eligible. And therefore there is actually $700,000 or so that will be returned, that will lapse back into the general fund or the education trust fund. I'm sorry, I don't know which way that gets sent back. But so yes, technically those 3 projects came under, I won't say under budget, some things were not eligible, and therefore $700,000 will be returned. But what I may have also said is that of this $13 million, building aid was not fully funded in fiscal 21. So $13 million could have been if $50 million was appropriated, but $50 million was not appropriated. Only 39 or so million dollars was appropriated, which left me only $1.9 million to give.
So if I heard what you said, out of what was appropriated in the 2021 budget, that you have spent all that you had except for 700,000, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, and that will come back to us. All right, thank you.
And on a longer list, I could offer that $700,000 to the next ranked project. But my project list only had 5 projects, and the bottom 2 did not pass their local warrant articles. So when you don't have local approval, you can't accept building aid, which is important to remember because some of these projects might not pass their local approval. That doesn't mean I still give them building aid. Obviously, I can't give them building aid until they actually have to have a contract, and they have to have state fire marshal's office approval. There's a lot of other approvals that they need prior to accepting the aid. So page 8, you might want to avert your eyes because I'm going to do some scrolling, but page 8 through 14 is just the payments. You can look on any one of these. These are those obligated payments. And so this is fiscal 22 and 23 payments that I'm making. These are all those projects that we've built in the past 20 years. Londonderry, for example, there was an addition renovation put on the South Londonderry Elementary School. The project was about $5 million. Their aid amount was a little over $1 million. We paid this $1 million. We paid it over it was built in 2010. You can see this was a 20-year bond. So from 2010 to 2029, we're paying them approximately $79,000 a year for 20 years. We owe them $638,000 over the course until 2029, and we'll be done paying the project in 2020. So here's just all the projects, the obligated projects, if you kind of want to look to see that we paid for. If you're interested in what that total tail is, that would be that dark blue bar. If you wanted to just be like, we're just going to pay it off all in one lump sum, that total remaining payments is $163 million. In FY '20, we'll be paying that 26 million, and FY '23 will be paying that 20. Those are those dark blue bars. Let's see, what else do I have here? I think this is one of my last things on building aid is Representative Keith was mentioning these projects that were built during the moratorium. Well, this is a list of projects that I know of that have built during the moratorium. I would use this list cautiously if there was ever talk of funding retro projects. Obviously, I don't know anything about these projects because they didn't go through the Department of Education because they did not receive building aid. But in the past 10 years during the moratorium, these are the projects that are committed. I have no way of telling whether they're eligible, if they spent their money the way they should have. I'm sure they did. But this is the total project cost. This was done by surveys, or sometimes I would read it in a newspaper and I would add it to the list. So this is not a fully vetted list, but it kind of gives you an idea of the projects that are out there, their total costs, their building aid rate, if they were funded today. It didn't go back and pick the specific year, but this is approximately what the rate would have been. And then their building aid, what would have been. They did not receive building aid. And the year, sometimes I had trouble figuring out the year. And to be honest, most of this was done by a survey. So most of this data, I'd say 90% of this data was given to me by the schools themselves. On the bottom, you'll see, if you're curious to know how much construction went on during the moratorium, about $554 million worth of projects were built without state aid. If we had granted state aid, it would have been close to 192 over the course of 10 years. And all I have for building aid. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Amy. Are there any questions that anyone has? I mean, we've asked 1,000 of them, and so I know that we probably have 1,000 more, but that's okay. So, Representative Murray, I'm sorry, you have another question.
No, I just have to say that was so totally clear and helpful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Absolutely. All the folks from education do a great job in keeping us informed, and because it's a lot of money that we have, and I really appreciate it. So I have 12. So let us come back if we could at 1, and I have a meeting at 2:30. So we will go from 1 to 2:30. But if we don't finish, don't worry about it. We have other time to take care of this, because we're not, we're not going to slight our time with education under any circumstances. So I guess then that we will recess until 1 o'clock, and I'll see you all then. Have a good lunch.
Okay.